For years, whispers about Princess Diana's most treasured belongings faded into the background, dismissed as nothing more than old royal gossip. Palace officials insisted every important possession had been carefully documented and protected, leaving no room for unanswered questions. But everything changed the moment Prince William received an unexpected file during a quiet review of historic family records. Hidden inside were references to one personal item that had mysteriously vanished shortly after Diana's death, an item that had never been publicly accounted for. At first, William believed it was simply another clerical mistake buried within decades of paperwork. Yet as he followed the trail, the missing records became harder to explain. Each document seemed to raise another question instead of providing an answer, and every step brought him closer to a truth that no one inside the royal household appeared eager to discuss. What began as a routine examination soon evolved into something far more personal, forcing William to confront memories of his mother alongside a series of decisions made long before he was old enough to challenge them. Before we uncover how this remarkable discovery reshaped relationships behind palace walls, make sure you're subscribed, because the story you're about to hear reveals why one forgotten piece of Diana's legacy suddenly became impossible for the royal family to ignore. The investigation began inside a secure archive where decades of royal correspondence, inventories, and personal records were stored under strict supervision. William had requested access after noticing inconsistencies between older catalog entries and recently updated records. At first glance, the differences appeared insignificant: missing dates, altered reference numbers, and handwritten notes replacing official descriptions. However, experienced archivists quietly admitted that such irregularities were extremely unusual when dealing with personal possessions belonging to a former Princess of Wales. As William examined the files more closely, one recurring reference continued appearing beside Diana's name before disappearing altogether from later inventories. Curiosity gradually turned into determination. Rather than assuming the records had simply been misplaced over time, he ordered copies of earlier documents to be compared page by page. The results revealed that several entries had been revised years after Diana's passing, yet no explanation had ever been attached to those changes. Palace staff struggled to clarify who authorized the revisions, while former officials offered conflicting recollections about what had happened during the original inventory process. Although nobody openly accused anyone of wrongdoing, the growing number of unanswered questions convinced William that the missing item represented more than an administrative oversight. Somewhere within the palace's carefully organized history, an important part of his mother's personal legacy had quietly disappeared from view. As the review continued, William found himself revisiting memories that had remained untouched for years. Unlike ceremonial jewels displayed during state occasions, this particular possession carried emotional significance because it reminded him of ordinary family moments rather than public appearances. He remembered watching Diana prepare for charitable visits, carefully selecting jewelry that meant something personally instead of simply matching royal tradition. Those childhood memories made the investigation increasingly difficult to separate from emotion. Every document he opened felt less like paperwork and more like another missing page from his own family's history. Senior palace advisors encouraged patience, reminding him that decades-old records often contained unavoidable inconsistencies. Yet William sensed that this situation was different. The more evidence he examined, the clearer it became that someone had consciously decided to remove certain details from official files instead of preserving them. That realization created an uncomfortable question. If an item intended to remain within Diana's family had disappeared from the historical record, who benefited from its absence? Rather than allowing frustration to dictate his actions, William instructed investigators to continue quietly, avoiding unnecessary attention while every surviving archive was carefully reviewed. Unknown to most members of the household, the search had already begun exposing decisions that reached far beyond a single missing possession. News of William's private inquiry spread discreetly through senior royal offices, creating an atmosphere of quiet tension behind palace walls. Although no public announcement had been made, long-serving aides recognized that unusual document requests rarely occurred without serious reason. Some believed the investigation would ultimately confirm nothing more than outdated filing mistakes. Others privately feared it might reopen painful chapters connected to Diana's legacy that the monarchy had spent years trying to leave behind. Meanwhile, William insisted that every available inventory, storage register, and transfer record be gathered into one secure location for independent review. Historians assisting the process noticed inconsistencies extending beyond a single document, suggesting that multiple revisions had occurred over several years rather than during one isolated event. That pattern made accidental error increasingly difficult to believe. As discussions intensified, King Charles was informed that his eldest son had expanded the investigation beyond ordinary archival corrections. While the king expressed support for establishing accurate historical records, those closest to him observed a noticeable change in his demeanor whenever Diana's personal possessions became the subject of conversation. It was becoming increasingly clear that the investigation touched memories, decisions, and relationships still capable of influencing the royal family many years after Diana's passing. Everything changed when investigators uncovered a forgotten storage reference linked to an area rarely accessed except during official audits. Unlike ordinary archive rooms, this secure location contained personal family possessions awaiting confirmation before permanent cataloging. Among dozens of carefully labeled cases appeared a record that immediately caught William's attention, because its identification number matched the mysterious entry removed from earlier inventories. The discovery did not immediately reveal what remained inside the container, but it proved beyond doubt that the missing item had continued existing somewhere within royal custody long after official records suggested otherwise. Palace officials suddenly found themselves confronting questions they could no longer dismiss through administrative explanations alone. Why had the reference disappeared from updated documents if the storage record still survived? Who authorized the alteration, and why had nobody corrected it during previous reviews? William stood silently as the sealed container was prepared for examination, fully aware that whatever happened next might permanently reshape his understanding of his mother's legacy. The atmosphere inside the archive became almost unbearable, with every person present realizing they were witnessing the beginning of a discovery capable of changing conversations that had remained unresolved for decades. Yet no one could have predicted how deeply the answers would affect the royal family itself. The sealed container was carried into a private examination room where only a handful of trusted officials were permitted to remain. Every step followed strict archival procedures to ensure nothing inside could later be questioned or misrepresented. William stood quietly as conservators photographed the exterior before carefully breaking the aging security seal that had remained untouched for years. The room fell silent as the lid slowly opened, revealing carefully wrapped personal belongings that once belonged to Princess Diana. Most of the contents matched existing records, yet one empty velvet compartment immediately attracted attention. A faded identification card still rested inside, describing an item that should have been present but was nowhere to be found. The description matched the same missing entry William had traced through multiple inventories. Although the jewel itself remained absent, the surviving label proved beyond doubt that it had once been stored there before being removed at some unknown point. More importantly, investigators discovered handwritten initials beside the transfer reference initials that had never appeared in any official register reviewed during the inquiry. Rather than bringing closure, the discovery created an even larger mystery. Someone had deliberately moved the item while ensuring the paperwork left behind would never fully explain where it had gone. William immediately requested every surviving transfer log connected to the container, extending the investigation beyond storage records and into decades-old administrative correspondence. Palace archivists searched through thousands of handwritten files, internal memoranda, and security registers, hoping to reconstruct the object's journey. Hours later, one overlooked ledger produced an unexpected breakthrough. It documented an authorized movement from the archive shortly after Diana's memorial inventory, yet the destination column had been left unfinished. Even more surprising, the signature approving the transfer appeared to have been added using different ink than the surrounding entries, suggesting alterations made sometime after the original record was completed. Experienced record specialists privately acknowledged that such inconsistencies were exceptionally rare within royal archives, where documentation was normally treated with extraordinary care. William listened without interrupting, but the growing evidence left little room for coincidence. Each new document reinforced the possibility that the missing possession had not simply disappeared, it had been intentionally redirected, while the official history surrounding it gradually changed over time. Those involved in the review realized they were no longer investigating an administrative oversight. They were uncovering a sequence of decisions that someone had worked very hard to keep hidden beneath decades of carefully maintained royal procedure. As reports from the investigation reached senior members of the royal household, concern quietly spread through palace offices. Advisors who had initially dismissed the inquiry as routine now recognized its potential to trigger uncomfortable questions about past decisions. King Charles requested regular updates, emphasizing that every conclusion must be supported by documented evidence rather than speculation. William agreed completely, insisting the investigation remain respectful, factual, and free from unnecessary accusations. Nevertheless, the atmosphere grew increasingly tense as former staff members were contacted for clarification regarding events that had taken place many years earlier. Some recalled fragments of conversations, while others admitted their memories had faded with time. Although no testimony alone provided definitive answers, several accounts described unusual discussions surrounding Diana's personal belongings during the months following her death. Those recollections encouraged investigators to widen their search beyond inventories, examining correspondence, appointment diaries, and archived office schedules for overlooked connections. The picture remained incomplete, but one consistent pattern continued emerging. Important decisions concerning Diana's possessions had often been handled privately, involving only a very small circle of trusted individuals. William realized the truth would likely never be found in a single dramatic discovery. Instead, it would emerge gradually as scattered pieces of history finally began fitting together. Days into the review, investigators uncovered another forgotten archive containing duplicate inventory photographs preserved for insurance purposes. Unlike written records, these photographs provided visual evidence that could not easily be altered after the fact. William examined each image carefully, comparing identification numbers with the surviving documentation already collected. Then, one photograph stopped him completely. Resting inside a velvet presentation case was the same item whose description had disappeared from official files years earlier. The image confirmed its existence beyond any remaining doubt, while also revealing a handwritten destination tag attached shortly before the photograph had been taken. Curiously, that destination reference no longer appeared anywhere in the palace's current catalog system. Specialists enlarged the image and identified faint notations, almost impossible to notice with the naked eye. Those markings suggested the item had been prepared for reassignment rather than permanent storage. Yet no accompanying paperwork explained whether the transfer was ever completed or who ultimately received responsibility for it. William understood that the investigation had reached a decisive turning point. The missing possession was no longer a rumor supported only by incomplete paperwork. Photographic evidence established that it had once been carefully documented before vanishing from the official historical record. Armed with mounting evidence, William arranged a private meeting with King Charles to discuss the investigation's progress before any formal conclusions were announced. The conversation remained calm but deeply personal, reflecting years of shared history rather than public ceremony. William explained that his purpose had never been to assign blame or reopen old family divisions. His only objective was ensuring that Diana's personal legacy was preserved accurately and respectfully for future generations. Charles listened carefully while reviewing the photographs, inventory copies, and transfer records assembled during the inquiry. According to those familiar with the meeting, the king acknowledged that certain historical decisions deserved renewed examination whenever credible evidence emerged. He also agreed that transparency would ultimately strengthen public confidence more than unanswered questions ever could. Before the meeting concluded, both father and son approved expanding the review to include additional correspondence and private administrative files that had never previously been examined together. As William left the room, he understood that the investigation had entered an entirely new phase. The search was no longer focused solely on finding one missing possession. It had become an effort to establish an accurate historical record, ensuring that Princess Diana's legacy would be remembered through documented truth rather than uncertainty or rumor.